Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share 15 Wendigo and creepy Reddit horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Retsmah6. I was sent to hunt a man who turned into a Wendigo. I failed miserably. Alright, I'm not much of a writer, but I've been stuck for hours and I'm bored as hell, so here goes nothing. I'm part of a team that captures, but mostly kills, monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean legitimate monsters. Stuff like chupacabras, manticores, werewolves, and so on and so forth. We're not unique, not by any means. There are hundreds of teams dedicated to the same thing all over the world. And my team isn't necessarily the best one out there, but we're good, and I trust my teammates with my life, all 4 of them. We've been on dozens of missions, and I used to think that we were prepared for anything. But now, one of my teammates is dead, and the rest of us are injured and stuck in the back of an armored truck with a 3-meter-tall Wendigo screeching outside. I'm going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, and my teammates are all unconscious, so I've got nothing but time. I guess I'll start with how I got into this business, and how it works. It'll explain how I got into this mess. I was in the military, not going to say where, and I was good. Extremely good. Incredibly gifted in terms of both physical and mental strength. Good with weapons too. I never thought it would really mean much. Where I come from, the military is conscription-based, which basically means that, if you're a man, you're mandated to drop everything and serve in the military for 2 years. If you don't go to the military, you go to jail instead. Fun. I figured I'd just serve my 2 years, finish, go to university, get a degree in mechanical engineering, and live out the rest of my life. I thought all my military accomplishments would serve for nothing but just an interesting tidbit about me. But clearly, that wasn't the case. Just a few weeks before my 2 years were up, I was pulled into a room, which I never knew existed, and I was immediately met with some of the highest-ranking officers I've seen in my life. Initially, I thought they found out about the empty shell casing I smuggled out from a live firing for a souvenir a couple months ago, and I was bracing myself for a court-martial and a trip to the detention barracks. Hey, I never said I was good at following rules. But that wasn't the case. They told me how impressed they were by my performance, and they were transferring me to a special team based in another country, one whose name I've never heard of, made up of elite soldiers from all over the world. I would go there and continue training for another 4 years, and I would actually be sent out on real military operations. And I wasn't allowed to say no either. Initially, I was pissed. I had dreams, aspirations. Stuff I actually wanted to do. Not to mention I had just got a girlfriend, and we were still in the honeymoon phase. The idea of just dropping everything and being forced into military service, again, was maddening. That, and the whole real military operations thing. I mean, sure, I could hit 100% of the targets at the firing range, do 95 clean push-ups in a minute, and run for kilometers with a 15-kilogram bag strapped to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean I could fight terrorists or anything. I wanted to argue, make them change their mind, think I wasn't a good fit for it. Maybe even tell them about the shell casing. But before I could voice my protest, they showed me the pay. Oh my God, the pay. So much money. And they promised it would only go up. Now, where I live, the cost of living is high. Very high. Not to mention, I was a little money hungry at the time. I didn't want to become an engineer for the sense of accomplishment, if you get my meaning. So not only did I need the money, I wanted the money. I had a lot of stuff to pay for. I would have to get a house, a car, and a wedding ring for the girlfriend. Yes, I was planning on proposing. Oh, and also steroids. I take steroids. So, I went along with it. I got all my things together, hugged the parents, kissed the girlfriend, had one last drink with the boys, and went off to another country. Went to a base in the middle of nowhere, with a team made up of 20 people. Yup, the whole base for 20 people. I can still hear the Wendigo screaming. It's very distracting, just so you know. Back to the story. And then the training started. It was brutal. Way worse than anything I've ever experienced. At least in the regular military, safety is a concern, albeit not a huge one. Here, safety was unheard of. The trainers, which is all I can call them, since there were no ranks on the base, pushed us as hard as humanly possible. And sometimes, inhumanely. Once, they gave us no food for a week. Another time, they snuck into our bunk, and turned off the safeties on our guns. We had live rounds loaded, by the way. We were supposed to keep our guns loaded and with us at all times. We got screamed at for hours for that one. They said if we were real soldiers we wouldn't have let that happen. Many times I wanted to punch one of them right in the face. It's a literal miracle everyone made it to the end of training with their sanities and bodies intact. Maybe the steroids had something to do with that. I had to hide my use back in my home country, but here they actively encouraged it. They even bought us needles and everything. Reason being was, according to them, if injecting yourself with a gram of testosterone every week makes you run faster, lift heavier, recover quicker, and just basically be a better soldier, then you should do it. At the end of training, we were briefed on our operations too. They told us we were going to see and do things we never would have imagined. They told us monsters were real. Initially, we all laughed, and then were punished for laughing. They made us run 5 kilometers, then continued the briefing. They told us we would be hunting monsters, but only those that were a threat to people. And we wouldn't always kill them, sometimes just capture them. Because some monsters, like minotaurs, produce certain substances that can cure disease. Meanwhile, peaceful creatures, like Sasquatch, would be left alone. All of this said with a straight face. I still thought it was all a big joke. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But then they showed us videos. I still remember them, frame for frame. Monsters eating people, tearing people apart, nightmare stuff. And not to mention the video quality. You can't fake stuff that well. They sent us on our first mission a week after. Put us on a private jet and flew us off to Japan. Said we were looking for something called Gashidakuro. Supposed to be a giant skeleton that eats people. Which I mean, how do you keep the public unaware of something like that? A skeleton as big as a tree, just walking around, straight out of Clash Royale, what? So I clash a little. Big deal. I've got to hand it to the cover-up guys, they don't get the credit they deserve. We found it eventually. 2 of them, actually. Wasn't hard to be honest. They were over 20 meters tall in the middle of a rice field. According to legend, these things were supposed to only attack lone travelers. The village they had just massacred said otherwise. They saw us, let out a bellow, and sprinted straight at us. We ran straight towards the nearby tree line, hoping the oak trees would impede the monsters. One guy wasn't so lucky. He was always the slowest during group runs. He got snatched up, and the skeleton just bit his head clean off. At least his death was instant. Thank God for that. Speaking of instant deaths, I can still hear that Wendigo shuffling around outside. Maybe I should speed up my writing a bit. We took down both of the monsters with rockets. Now, according to folklore, from hundreds of years ago, the Gashitakuro are supposed to be invincible. But they didn't have RPGs hundreds of years ago, did they? When all you've got is a spear against a skeleton 15 times your size, it's going to seem invincible. Props to people from ancient times. I don't know how they survived against these things. So that was my first encounter with the supernatural. We went on a lot more missions after that. Eventually, as we got better, we started getting split up into smaller teams. I started to actually enjoy it. I was only interested in money in the beginning, but a sense of accomplishment started coming with it. I remember the first time I really felt proud of what I did. We were in some town in Greece, with a really small population, less than 10,000. There was a manticore absolutely demolishing the place. It was tearing its way through a row of houses when we came across it. Busting through a wall while a family on the other side was screaming for help. We took it down, and went to check on the family. There was a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, who ran up and hugged me. My heart melted a little, I'm not going to lie. I've always been fond of children. Her parents were probably scared of us, a bunch of guys with heavy weaponry and armor, but she wasn't. She just knew we saved her life, and she was thankful. I really thought about the impact of my job on that day. So, I was making bank and loving my job. Life was far from perfect, but it was good. And then one day it came. The mission that screwed up my entire life. We were sent off to Canada. There was a confirmed Wendigo presence in a forest very near a town, and people were starting to disappear. We had to take it down ASAP. Not a capture, a kill. Now, this Wendigo was particularly interesting. It used to be a human. That's pretty rare, apparently. Most Wendigos were made by a spirit in the sky or something, and the real ones are a lot stauncher than the people who become Wendigos. This specific Wendigo used to be a guy named Ned Terrell. He went off into the forest with his girlfriend, ironically, to look for a Wendigo, and they got lost in a blizzard or something. Then a few weeks later he turned up and started eating people. A bunch of doctors just figured he lost it and they locked him up. They said he had convinced himself he was a Wendigo, and that it was best for everyone that he stay locked in his room for the rest of his life. He even wrote a letter, pretending he was a Wendigo that got captured by humans. You can read it here. Creepy stuff. But the thing is, Mr. Terrell wasn't so crazy after all. A couple months after they locked him up, the doctors noticed something. He was growing. A lot. Now, Terrell was already a pretty big guy. About 2 meters, if I remember his profile correctly. Then one day, one of the doctors, I think his name was Bowman, realized he was a lot taller. They measured him, and he was 2.18 meters tall. A while after that, he was 2.34 meters. But even though he kept growing taller, he kept losing weight. Started at svelte 80 kilograms, he was pretty underweight after living in the forest and eating people for a couple months, and ended at 56 kilograms. And he kept getting stronger too. One day he leapt at the guards and took a chunk out of one guy's arm. Thank God for tranq darts. They hit him with enough stuff to take down an elephant. That was the day they decided they had to transfer him out to a more secure facility. They knew they were dealing with something they didn't have the ability to handle. So they threw him into a truck and transported him to a maximum security prison that was a couple hours away. At least that was the plan. Halfway there, he ate the driver, the guards, busted out and ran off. Pretty soon, reports of a giant emaciated man running through the forest and roaring his head off reached us. We sent a scout, who identified it, or I guess him, as a Wendigo, and my team was sent in. Now according to legend, humans can turn into Wendigos when they choose to resort to cannibalism instead of starving, or they can be possessed and forced to commit cannibalism by Wendigos. Which one is Terrell? Personally, I'm hoping he's the second option. At least that way, he dies with his humanity intact. The sounds outside have died down a little. Mr. Terrell must have gotten bored. I can relax a bit. We went out into the forest, the 5 of us. Body armor, assault rifles, grenades, rockets, all of it. We thought we could take him. We could not. It started off so slowly. We found its tracks and started following them. There was a blizzard going on, which is apparently something Wendigos can do. There's a blizzard going on now actually, but my team had no problems. We followed them in our armored truck for an hour or so. Then all of a sudden, it was just on top of us. Never saw where it came from. Unbelievable speed. It tore my teammate out of the driver's seat and swallowed him whole. He was a big dude too. 1.9 meters tall and built like a young Brock Lesnar. Just got swallowed up, starting from the feet. He screamed the whole time too. I'll never forget it. The Wendigo just unhinged its jaws and leapt on him. One movement, he was suddenly swallowed up to his waist. The truck crashed and the rest of us jumped out and ran for cover, I'll admit it. Even professionals get scared. We just watched our teammate get eaten. Took a while, too. He was screaming and begging, one arm pinned to his side, and the other flailing around. He had broken the #1 rule, always have your gun loaded and with you, so there was nothing he could do. It took us a few seconds, but we opened fire. The Wendigo was squatting on top of the truck, its jaws now around the guy's chest. We killed our teammate, but he was dead anyway, we just granted him mercy. We emptied our mags at that thing, and we only hit it twice. Visibility was poor due to the blizzard, and like I said, it was fast. Seriously, faster than anything I've ever seen. It stood up, and it was huge. Absolutely dwarfed us. It was thin as a rake too, ribs nearly tearing through its skin, skeletal arms, kneecaps very visible. I saw a photo of a family of Indian villagers during the Madras famine once. It looked just like them. Very human looking. Just looking at its face, you would think it was just a starving man. I saw a picture of Mr. Terrell, back when he was a regular guy. You could definitely tell it was him. It tipped the truck over and sprinted straight for us, lashed out, tearing through our armor like it was cardboard. One of us, I don't even remember who, got a grenade off. Unfortunately, not a direct impact, but still made it back off for a while at least. We jumped straight into the back of the truck and put it into lockdown mode. If you're slow and can't figure out what lockdown mode does, it locks the truck down. Metal covers sliding over the windows, a bunch of electronic locks, makes it a fortress. Unfortunately, it also prevents it from driving, because the wheels withdraw into the body. The Wendigo started slamming on the doors, but it couldn't get in. It's strong, but not that strong. So that brings us back to where we started. I sent a distress signal out a while ago, but I got no response. The blizzard may be blocking our communications. The snow's coming down really hard. It's freezing, even with the truck's heater. I'm really hungry for some reason too. I can't have been here for more than a couple hours, but I'm absolutely starving. Even the time I didn't get food for a week at base wasn't this bad. I'm ravenous. But there's no food. And I sure as hell am not going out there. I won't make it very far. My teammates are still out for the count. I don't really know what to do now. I can't hear the Wendigo, but as long as the blizzard's here, I know it's out there. There's a video feed of the outside, but I turned it off. I need to conserve energy. The last I saw the Wendigo, it was eating the snow my teammates' blood spilled on. This thing leaves no traces. It would probably lick blood off the walls if it could. It can't get in, but I can't go out. The situation seems pretty hopeless. But hey, if you're reading this, that means I made it out. I'm typing on the Notes app on my phone, so the only way for someone to see this is if I get out of here. I'm going to take a little break and think about what to do now. Goodbye. Hey guys, I found this story on a phone in the back of a wrecked truck I came across while hiking through the woods. I called the cops as soon as I saw it, but I snooped through it to find any valuables, sorry, and I found this. What do you guys think? It's probably just some BS, right? I mean, there aren't any bodies in the truck, or blood even, which, if this is real, should be the case. There was a really heavy blizzard a day ago, but that's just regular Canadian weather, right? Wendigos and monsters, they're made up. Right? Maybe some aspiring writer crashed and decided to just type a story while he waited for help, then just left his phone and walked away. That doesn't make sense. And the truck was crazy, it was more of a tank than a truck. I don't think writers would really drive stuff like that. And there were a bunch of weapons too. I didn't touch them though. I'm wearing pretty thick gloves, but I can't risk getting any of my DNA on a firearm. I'm out on probation right now. There were prints leading away from the truck at least. Only one set though. And they were huge, I mean seriously. This guy was big. Barefoot too. I hope he made it out alright. I'm walking back to my house while typing this. I still don't know what to make of it. The only way it adds up is if the story is real, but it can't be, right? I mean, I would have seen something by now. Whatever. I already told the cops and they're on the way. They'll figure it out and I'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on getting home now. It's starting to snow pretty heavily again, and the wind's picking up. I hope it's not a blizzard. Second story. This story was shared by you/Prime84. Wendigo 1860. Tim points his gun and whispers, "I see it, but it doesn't see us." I snapped Tim, "We don't have the time nor the resources for this, let's go before." That was when it in question, a Wendigo, pointed its head straight up with a crack and began to sniff the air before twisting and writhing unnaturally with the sounds of a million bones snapping. I was drawn out of my awe when Tim's gun went off, and in an instant, the beast leaped towards us, only missing us 'cause I pushed Tim behind a tree. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. I was a small-time bounty hunter, and Tim he was a bartender and self-proclaimed master tracker. I'd take him along with me for jobs that I couldn't handle alone. The only problem being, he was a bit of a hothead. Never seemed to be too much of an issue, till he tried taking pot shots at something darn near bulletproof. Anyhow, after I pushed Tim behind the tree we got to scurrying like a couple of raccoons that was just hit with a broom. We quickly got up the short hill, and I got to making a plan before it was on us again. Neither took long. Tim had ideas of his own however and began to shoot at it. The creature was on him instantly, and it pulled back its arm when I shot it, getting its attention. It turned and looked at me while I had it distracted. Tim wriggled the muddy 16-bore shotgun off his back and blasted the creature in the face. It stumbled back off of him stunned. At that moment I grabbed my rifle and shot it again. It leaped for me and I dove behind a fallen tree. The creature landed hard on a large portion of a tree, getting impaled. Now the way I got this odd job wasn't exactly normal. One day while pursuing a shop, an old man approached me. He said he'd give me $500 to kill the creature that lives in the woods on his property. So of course I took the job. I figured it was just some crazy guy in the woods, or a coyote, or some wolves, or something. I took Tim just in case I had any trouble. After the thing impaled itself on the tree, it writhed and screeched. Tim got to his feet and shot it again, sending an antler and some bone chunks flying. It wasn't dead. As it started to pull itself from the tree, me and Tim bolted. It was just then that I remembered that the old man had given me a stick of dynamite. I turned, lit it, and tossed it into the tree next to where the creature was implied. Just as it pulled itself from the jagged stump, the large oak fell, trapping the creature. We ran and we didn't look back. When I returned to the old man's shack, there was a note with $500. The note said, "Thank you for freeing me of this burden." I never saw the old man again. Third story. This story was shared by you/just the 20%. I think it was Bigfoot. 2 weeks ago I considered myself a reasonably skeptic man. I was convinced that somewhere in the vastness of this realm another intelligent life form inhabited an Earth-like planet. Whether or not said beings have visited us was up for debate. Even though I had never personally experienced anything that could be considered paranormal, I had heard enough stories to leave open the possibility. On the contrary, the notion of the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Yeti, Mothman, and crypto things alike was laughable. As I lay in this hospital bed, crippled, in pain and in fear, my view on monsters has drastically changed. I work night shift security for a company that had been experiencing significant vandalism. Graffiti, broken windows, litter, the types of things bored kids find fun to do. The building is located on the outskirts of a small suburban area. The back side, shop area, of the property faces a set of train tracks, a little traveled highway, and a vast forest beyond the road. The front was offices, where I spent most of my time. My duties basically involved watching TV and playing video games while keeping an ear out for any mischief outside. Once every hour I would take a stroll around the perimeter of the building. The first few months were the most eventful. It was rare that a night would pass and I didn't have to chase some kids off. A few times these encounters got a bit dicey. I'm not a gun person, so this led to me bringing my German Shepherd pup, Shu, to work with me. He is named after Michael Schumacher. Once the hoodlums realized that my dog didn't like strangers, they stopped coming around. The job became a breeze for a while. And then some strange things started happening. It all started 3 Thursdays ago. It was raining that particular night. I don't make the rounds as much when it rains as I figure nobody really cares to be out in that crap. I was working a typical 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift and the 2 previous perimeter checks were uneventful. I donned my rain gear and headed out for a 4 a.m. check. As soon as I stepped outside, I was greeted by a horrific odor. A combination of feces, wet dog, and a dumpster on a 100-degree day raped my nostrils. I don't know if it was the smell or what, but Shu was hesitant to leave my side. Unusual behavior for him. As we made our way around the building, the smell still piercing our noses, my flashlight picked up the reflection of something in the grass. It was a blood trail. Shu led the way along the path. Ultimately, we discovered a deer carcass. It was absolutely torn to shreds, blood and guts everywhere. Both of its hind legs were missing. Once morning came around, and the evidence was brought to the building's owner attention, we both agreed it was most likely some type of a prank. We buried the remains in a hole in a far corner of the property. The next night was clear but crisp. My rounds occurred more frequently. Everything was normal until around 2 a.m. It was somewhere around 2:45 when Shu started freaking out. He was barking incessantly, and I couldn't calm him down. I walked into the shop area and immediately heard what sounded like heavy footsteps coming from the roof of the building. A brief check around the building revealed no ladders or any other means of accessing the roof. That smell from the day before was lingering, although nowhere near as pungent. Besides my personal account, no other evidence was able to be reported to the owners. Saturday night was uneventful. Sunday evening would change my life forever. After a fairly anxious but boring 3 hours, I hear a window break. Shu is scratching at the door before I can even get to it. It sounded like a back of the building occurrence, so we quickly made our way there. Everything appeared normal. No kids, no pranksters, nothing. Then Shu took off in a dead sprint. He ran straight towards a small grove of trees separating the property from the train tracks. As I yelled for him to come back, he froze in his tracks about 10 feet from a cluster of 4 or 5 trees. A large, muscular arm reached out and encased his head in its palm. A quick jerk of the wrist and Shu's neck snapped like a twig. Horrified by the sight, I let out an audible gasp. Whatever this beast was, it immediately focused its attention in my direction. There are 3 entrance points to this building, the nearest 2 are locked. The only unlocked entrance point would require me to run between this monster and the door. Since it was dark, I figured I could make it. I started sprinting. I made it about 25 to 35 yards before I felt a tug on the back of my shirt. The strength of the grip rendered me unable to escape. I fell to the ground. My heavy breathing only served to drown out the thunderous beating of my heart. I managed to gather my bearings only to realize I was being mounted by something. I suppose it took my mind a while to comprehend what my eyes were viewing. I was being pinned to the ground by an ape. An ape covered head to toe with matted red to brownish fur. A human face with a primate body had me pinned to the earth. This creature's eyes glowed a vibrant red. We locked eyes, and it was at this point I came to the conclusion this beast was about to take my life. I vaguely remember trying to kick and punch my way out of this thing's control. My attempted recourse proved futile. My last memory is a bit clouded, but I can clearly recall looking this thing eye to eye, and feeling a certainty of death. The giant beast picked me up and hurled my defenseless body against a tree. 20 to 28 feet up, the tree snapped in half. My helpless body served as an unsuccessful saw. I assume a Sasquatch is what broke my back and has left me confined to this hospital bed. My vertebrae lost its battle against said lumber. Bigfoot is real. Bigfoot kicked my ass. I'll never forget that smell. I'll never forget my eye contact with a creature spawned straight from the depths of hell. I miss Shu, and I miss my innocence. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Nzamstar. The Yeti of the Mamacus. One of the best things about New Zealand is that there is no animal in the bush that can hurt you, so you're meant to tramp around the forest at night all you want and not get mauled. Anyway, two of my mates decide to go spotlighting for deer in the Mamaku forest near Rotorua. They are avid hunters, been hunting since like 10 years old at least. It's a bit of a drive and they lock the forest gate at night, so the plan was to camp in the forest. The locals occasionally take their unwanted dogs up there, tie them up along the side of the road and shoot them, which is spooky to me, that's why I'm mentioning it. I think people also drop dead animals off the side of the road, as a pig dump, to get the wild pigs to come to the road to feed, gives the pig dogs some tracks to follow. Anyway, they had been hunting, didn't get anything, were parked up along the road and decided to hit the hay, set up a tent or whatever to sleep in. Before they got to sleep, however, they started to hear this horrible noise from some kind of animal. Like a growling/rasping/bellowing noise, calling out from the darkness of the bush every couple of seconds. The kind of noise it made was something neither of them had ever heard before in the bush, and sometimes these guys walk for days to hunting spots, or get dropped in by chopper to remote areas, so they have spent many nights in the bush. It wasn't even during the roar, mating season when the deer roar. They lay there trying to figure out what kind of animal it was, and the noise got louder and closer. It dawned on them that the noise being made could not be from a deer, or a pig, or even a human, because the noise was so loud/strange that the lungs driving the noise had to be larger than any animal they could think of that would be in the bush. They could hardly even describe/recreate the noise, it was so strange. At this point they were starting to get freaked out. They loaded the gun back up and decided to see if they could find the source of the noise. They started to track towards it, one person holding the gun, the other with the spotlight. Unfortunately, the bush towards the noise was too thick, which cut down their visibility to like 5, maybe 10 meters. This would obviously present a tactical disadvantage if the thing decided to charge them through the bush. So they ended up tracking back through the bush to road. The noise still didn't stop, so they were like, fuck this, and slept in the car with the gun loaded. I think eventually the noise stopped and they were able to get some sleep, got up in the morning and came home. To this day they have been unable to think of any animal in NZ that could produce such a noise. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/RealGhosts25. The Wendigo learned to tell time on Thanksgiving. I know what you're thinking. A mythical spirit being able to tell time isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm here to tell you it's necessarily a bad thing. A horrible thing, in fact. Without the ability to tell time, the Wendigo would strike randomly, out of nowhere, maybe going decades or centuries without attacking. But maybe I'm being too naive. Maybe the Wendigo has made me naive, cloaking its murders in various, everyday seeming tragedies. I live out in the country, miles away from the excitement of city life, of neon sin shrouded in innocent novelty. Somehow, though, the chaos of city life found me. My father told me as long as you stay in the house you've lived in all your life, nothing could harm you. Like a fool, I believed him. I followed in my father's footsteps, and it led to my ruin. A kindly neighbor, Joe, moved in next door, although next door is a bit misleading since acres separate humans from each other out here. He was younger, spry, and full of beans. He had a wife, a quiet woman named Jennifer, and one child, barely 5 months old. Despite being at heart a good-natured fellow, he seemed stressed out because the child, Desmond, kept slipping from one illness to the next. One day things seemed especially bad, around Thanksgiving time if I recall. The leaves had all but been sucked off the trees, and it had been raining all day. I didn't have a good feeling about that day. Something seemed off, a little too dismal. I had been thinking bad thoughts ever since the sun woke me up. The objective observer would tell you that this was because my wife expired a few months before, and that I still hadn't come out the other side yet, you know. But I know, the Wendigo, well, let's put it this way, when the Wendigo wants you to know he's coming, he'll give you clues the day before, sometimes the week before. Anyway, I told Joe about the Wendigo, about how if you knew what you were doing, you could make the spirit give your child, or anyone, a more stable flame of life if it was sputtering for some reason. He looked at me like I was crazy or something. I knew I wasn't. Eventually, he caught on, realizing a man with such sure convictions couldn't be wrong. I gave Joe the scroll I used to save my wife from the brink so many years ago. I told him the fine print was something worth reading. That if you performed the ritual in a wrong way, the Wendigo would be as clear-minded about mortal affair as you or me, be able to tell time, insert himself into the flow of our reality without missing a beat. Well, I won't go into too much detail about what happened, or how it happened. Joe performed the ritual wrong, as I knew he most likely would. But I just couldn't let a kid die, you know. I went to Joe's house for Thanksgiving. He knew I was a lonely old man who had just lost his wife. Usually, I wasn't one for a pity invite, but I figured I didn't want to spend the hours ticking off the seconds in my head and waiting for the axe to fall. Better to keep yourself busy. I'll never be able to get that grisly scene out of my head as long as I live. Joe's body was spread out on the coffee table, his face looking miserable and defeated. Jennifer's corpse rested in the fireplace. The lights had been turned off except for a single dim bulb hanging from the kitchen ceiling. Desmond sat at the kitchen table, gnawing on his dad's fingers. He stared at me curiously, like a cat often stares at its master when eating its meal. "Oh, why did you do it, Joe? You gave the scroll to an idiot." A man so addled at the prospect of losing his son, of being outside the pleasant rhythm of society, that he'd do just about anything in order to make sure his son stayed alive, Desmond said. His eyes were bleeding sockets, and it occurred to me that was how my dad said the Wendigo entered a human body, through the eyes, making them explode. "Would you like a finger, maybe a thigh?" "It is Thanksgiving after all." Desmond gave me a wicked smile, a smile no child of 5 months should be capable of. "Now you just stay right there, don't come any closer," I said in a firm voice. Joe just had to read the scroll in front of his wall clock, so desperate to save his son he couldn't read the fine print, Desmond went on. Surprisingly, Desmond didn't try to kill me that day. He told me my time was coming, and that I'd know when my curtain would flow across the dusty stage of my life when he wanted me to know. Then he got up, told me not to disturb his great feast because he would be back to devour them in their entirety. So many months have passed since then. The Wendigo devoured his victims, and it was like they never existed at all. Now I'm staring at my own wall clock, thinking every day the axe might fall. The Wendigo can tell time now, and he can confer with the Reaper, know the date and time of my death, and say, I know this old man should die via electrocution, but let me lend a helping hand. Sixth story. This story was shared. My Himalayan expedition to find the Yeti. A few years ago, I got a job doing camera work for a Discovery special on the Yeti. That special never aired, and here I am breaking my NDA to say why, because I think these events need to be made known. I'm a professional photographer and cameraman by trade, specifically nature photography, but a gig is a gig. I knew a friend from college who worked for Discovery, filming for some of their extreme nature shows. You know, like Bear Grylls, surviving shows, or those ones that follow a reporter into some cool Egyptian tomb. I was doing mostly wedding photography at the time, but always wanted to do something like my friend was doing for Discovery. As luck would have it, he became seriously ill right before he was scheduled to fly out to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, for a new TV special on the Yeti. He put in my name and they offered me his job. I happily accepted. I was too excited, a free trip to Nepal and a real TV gig. The farthest I have been from the States was Italy for a wedding. I got all my stuff together and drove down to LA to meet my sick friend. I lived in Seattle at the time. He let me use his equipment and I was very grateful to him for getting me the job. Don't sweat it, have fun over there and make sure you listen to what they want you to do. You'll be going into some pretty rough terrain. It's hard work, so stay hydrated. The physical part was no problem for me. I walked a lot and also liked to run marathons. I thanked him again and took off for the airport. The plane ride was long, really long, but otherwise uneventful. I mainly needed a nap as my back was killing me from the seats and the jet lag on top. At the airport I met the others in the crew. There was one other cameraman, Willie, who knew my friend from back home. Then there was the show's host, an Aussie named Rob, and Rob's assistant producer, Karen. I have to tell you guys, as soon as I got out of the airport I felt like I walked into a wall of pollution. The city Kathmandu is huge, dense, smelly and noisy. Nepal borders India, so if you've ever been there, or seen places like Delhi on TV, Nepal is not much different. Willie, who was also Filipino and blended in better with the locals, hailed us a cab. We all went to a Western hotel. Karen informed me that she would be staying at the hotel, and we would be meeting a local guide she arranged for us. The rest of the day I mainly walked around near the hotel, ate some local food, took some photos with my own camera. Me and Karen were the only ones still awake at this point. I still felt wired despite being exhausted from the flight, so we walked down a bit to a nearby square we heard some music coming from. There was about 20 or so people there crowded around this Nepalese man who was dancing in a circle while some other men played drums and an instrument I couldn't name. It was some sort of flute. The dancer was wearing a golden silk gown and a papier-mâché mask. The mask was interesting, as it looked like what you'd see during Chinese New Year. Painted bright red, with intricate yellow and green patterns surrounding orb-like white eyes and two long fangs that slanted outward from the mouth hole. The mask also had long bright red hair that covered the dancer's head entirely, so all you saw was the mask and his body. Karen was able to speak a bit of Nepali, and gesturing to the dance she asked one of the drummers what the mask was. He looked confused at her poor Nepali for a moment, then laughed and simply said, "Lucky." Later at the hotel, I googled, on the brutally slow internet, what a Lucky was, and apparently it's some sort of demon from Nepalese folklore that protects townspeople. I shut off my laptop and then managed to get a nice long sleep. The next day we met our guide Sherpa, Harish. He was from a village about 8 hours northeast of Kathmandu, going up into the Himalayas. We put our equipment into a rented truck and then up we drove through the city, then the poor slums/suburbs beyond before finally mountainous farmland. Rob got Willie to film him interviewing Harish for a bit as he drove. Harish told us he had seen glimpses of the yeti as a boy and the beast left footprints in the sand near rivers and streams. Many of the villages near him had reported sightings too, but often some kids go looking in their own, he says, but mostly they get lost out in the dense mountains jungle. Sometimes they will come back with scratches and bruises, usually from falling, tripping, or even sometimes bites from snakes. Harish continued explaining that the local legends of the Yeti became world famous when Western explorers began coming to Nepal for exploration mainly around the early 20th century. The myths exploded as more mountaineers came hoping to see a glimpse of the Bigfoot cousin on their climb up the various mountains, the most famous obviously being the Everest. Harish claims the Yeti exists but understands why many Westerners and even those from the cities are more skeptical, because there are other great apes like orangutans in the jungle which people could think is the Yeti. We stopped filming and let Harish drive. It takes us almost all day and it was not a pleasant ride. Most of the roads were little more than dirt paths and some spots were very high up, overlooking gorges with nothing but flimsy aluminum barriers to protect your vehicle if it careened off the road. We reach his village at about 9 p.m. local time. I was expecting some wooden hut village like you saw on TV, but this village was more like a small town. They had power, concrete buildings, and a few paved, albeit poorly, streets. Most of the buildings though were shanty huts, with aluminum ceilings and wood or old concrete as walls. Harish took us to the only hotel in town, which was a simple 2-story motel. We agreed to meet early in the morning, around 5 a.m., since Harish said that was the best time to potentially get a sighting. The hotel room was what you would expect from the third world, a bare-bones mattress that was right on the ground, a hole in the ground with a plastic cover for a toilet and a hose with nozzle for a shower. Luckily the motel restaurant served some decent chicken. I managed to get a few hours of sleep, but slept in my clothes as the nights got very cold that high up in the Himalayan foothills. I woke up and met the crew bright and early. Harish drove us a bit away from the village, but not too far as we'd have to go the rest of the way on foot. He said most sightings are near a stream that runs at the bottom of a gorge. However, the Nepal government was building a dam just north of the village and most of the river was dried up, so we could walk along the sandy banks. The river was not far from the road, maybe 15 minutes walk through the jungle. I could see what the dam was doing to the gorge. The water was confined to a small stream in the middle of what must have once been a great river. On either side, as Harish said, were sandy banks and rocks. Me and Willie began filming at this point and we began trekking north. In either side of the gorge were steep tree-covered hills and you could see in the distance the first mountains of the Himalayas. Every so often we would stop and Harish would explain to Rob a bit more about the Yeti and Rob would relay his own opinions as well. Harish would point out various animal tracks, including bears and even a tiger, so we had reference for when he showed us the real Yeti footprint up ahead. We trekked on for what felt like an hour, following the dried-up river bank. My friend back home was certainly right about it being tough terrain. I consider myself pretty fit, but even this was getting tough as we kept going uphill. Eventually we hit a turn in the river marked to my right by a steep cliff face. Harish beckoned us over to show some sort of ape-like footprint in the dried river sand. I kept filming as Rob asked some questions about how the villagers found it. Could it just be a regular ape/orangutan, that sort of thing. The footprint was pretty odd though, even if it was an orangutan. It was about the size of a bear's but definitely humanoid/apish in shape with 4 toes and a larger opposable toe. We took photos of the print and then used the opportunity to have a lunch break. The footprint was weird but interesting, I thought at the time. Looking back, this is where I wish we had stopped. After lunch, Harish told us that the yeti is probably an undiscovered ancestor or relative to apes. He says it likes to live in caves, and has evidence. The cave mention was given to Karen, who told Rob, weeks ago, so it was no surprise to Rob. These nature productions are all generally scheduled well in advance with guides, so there are no surprises. We packed our stuff and began to hike up into the jungle towards this cave, up the steep terrain near the cliff side. When I thought the hike up the river was tough, I hadn't experienced a real hike yet. Back home I would hike around Seattle and near Portland when I would visit my parents, but trails cannot compare to walking through unexplored Himalayan jungle bush. Not to mention I had 60-odd pounds of A/V equipment on my back. The jungle is certainly a unique place though. You are introduced to a whole new soundscape from monkeys yelling at each other, tons of different birds, the rustling of vegetation and even some weird chirps from insects I couldn't even name to you. Eventually the constant uphill battle took a turn south, literally. Harish led us downhill until we were standing face to face with this cave. It had a low ceiling, maybe 5 feet, but was quite wide, about the length of a city bus. The entrance was covered in thick bush except a cutaway hole where presumably this yeti entered and exited. At the moment Willie began to film Rob and Harish entering the cave, a shrill shriek came from behind the area we hiked up. I nearly fell over and my muscles went stiff. Instinctively, I swung my camera around but couldn't locate where the shriek had come from. Rob turned, with a look of concern. Willie and Harish, on the other hand, were grinning at me. Willie had his camera pointed into the treetops and was holding back a laugh to keep his camera steady. "Look up there," Willie said, pointing up. I followed his gaze to see a small brown monkey hanging from a branch. Howling monkey. "Haha, looks like you saw a ghost, nah." The anxiety in me slowly let down as the monkey screamed again right at us a couple more times before taking off into the treetops. I must have let out the biggest sigh of my life and we turned to go into the cave. Rob interviewed Harish again before entering. Harish said some local boys found this place and they saw the yeti leaving the cave. Rob made a little joke and then we went in the cave. As you would expect, the cave was pitch black. Good thing we had lights on our cameras in addition to night vision. The cave didn't seem to go that far back, but it was difficult to tell. The ceiling seemed to get lower and lower as you went in. Rob was walking sort of backgrounds, talking to the camera as he spoke about the history of the yeti sightings, that sort of thing. We started having to duck our heads as the ceiling kept getting lower and light from the entrance grew smaller. We were maybe 30 yards in. Rob was talking. The first Western sighting of the yeti was in 1832 when he stopped as his foot hit something. He mumbled and turned to see how big the rock was to move around it. Only when he turned and shined his head light on the ground his foot had not hit a rock. I could see trough my camera a humanoid mass on the ground, like someone in the fetal position. "What the fuck, it is a man," Willie exclaimed. Rob jumped back and Harish went to go see what was wrong. He turned the man over, who was completely naked and covered in filth. Harish looked up at me. The man was clearly a Westerner. He had a shaggy beard, was very skinny and looked extremely dehydrated. He was still alive though, mumbling something and holding himself. There were 2 small holes in the side of the man's, like some sort of bite. A bat maybe? We were in a cave and the man had clearly been here for some time. We thought he was a lost tourist or mountaineer at first, but then Harish picked up a piece of plastic near the man and held it up to me. I read it out loud, Jacques Richard, ingénieur. Rob replied, ingénieur, French for engineer. He must work at the dam. Harish agreed, explained that the dam was partially funded by the French government and the World Bank. We agreed he must have gotten lost and went to help him up when the same shriek from the howler monkey emerged from the cave entrance. I turned, slowly, keeping my camera rolling. Through the lenses I saw a very tall, dark, lanky figure standing in the cave entrance. It had no clothing, no fur, just a huge head of hair that was completely dark like the rest of its silhouette. I could make out the monkey's squirming body in the creature's mouth. It screamed again, then there was a crunch and a sick slurping noise. All I could make out from the silhouette were 2 enormous, beady, white eyes staring at my camera. 7th story. This story was shared by u/B4C0NB34TD0WN. Wendigo Encounter. I've been debating on sharing this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or to give understanding of what someone else has experienced. Late fall 2010, in northern Canada, I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy/lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and along the tree line, I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said, "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here, so I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear had made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the river bank and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the river bank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back and I yelled that, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too, I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards, would see things/dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men/shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I loved being outdoors/hunting and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real, I can attest to that. Stay safe everyone. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Big Slanginit. I've seen the Mothman. I've never told anyone this or talked about it to anyone besides the people that were with me that night and my best friend that claims to have seen him at a different date that I didn't know about until I described my experience to him. I lived in a small town Bastrop, Louisiana with my cousin and his wife. There's not much to do in Morehouse Parish besides drive back roads like we've done thousands of times before. Then one night in 2015 we were leaving a church we used to clean. It was around 2 a.m. or so. We were in my cousin's 1990 GMC Sierra single cab 4x4. We decided to ride back roads. So we're cruising, me and him are talking and listening to Nirvana. Probably we played music together. But anyway, his wife was asleep in the middle seat when we turned on a paved road 5 miles or so outside of town and come around a curve, and there it was, something we had never seen before. I'm an avid hunter, been in the woods all hours of the night and day, was in the army, but had never been more freaked out by something than what we witnessed. There was something dead in the road and something was eating it. When the headlights hit it, it looked up, was about 2.5 to 3 foot tall, like it was kneeling over whatever it was eating, had red eyes, and it stood up so fast seemed like a millisecond, was 7 or 8 feet tall, was pitch black. Its skin looked like a bat's skin but way darker, and in one fell swoop it leapt and its wings opened and flew into the woods on the side of the road. It had to be moving over 50 miles per hour. Fucking wildest experience of my life. And I've always been cynical when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I know what I saw that night, and so does my cousin. 9th story. This story was shared by you/group. I'm a park ranger. I found something in Yosemite that can't be explained. The rocky dirt road crunched beneath the truck's tires as I drove through the dense forest, careful of the branches which overhung the path and scraped the windows. My eyes were darting around constantly, keeping an eye out for wildlife and fallen trees. This far into Yosemite, there weren't many people, but as a park ranger it's my job to patrol these woods and protect visitors from nature as much as possible. Not to mention protecting nature from them. Especially this time of year when unlicensed hunters are out, and clueless campers and amateur hikers are roaming alongside them. It's often a lethal combination. Just as I was thinking about amateur hikers, I saw a woman standing a little ways off the road. She was in a rock-strewn field on a slope leading up a hill to my left. Despite the fact that we were out in the middle of nowhere, she had no hiking equipment, no backpack, nothing. As I got closer, she saw me, but began to walk away, marching up the rocky slope. This far out in the middle of nowhere, I expected a wave or a hello at the very least. Most of the time if you're out here on foot you don't see anyone for days at a time. "Hey, miss. Are you okay?" I yelled, worrying she was suffering from exposure. Sometimes people get lost out in these woods and by the time you reach them they're nearly catatonic. I'd seen it before, men and women with 1,000-yard stare. She didn't respond, instead continuing up the slope until she reached the top. Then she disappeared into the tree-line. The woman's face looked familiar, I realized, and pulled up a file on my laptop. It showed people who had been reported missing in the area. It took a minute, but eventually I found the woman's file. There were photos that matched the person I had just seen exactly. Except her clothes were different. And the woman had been reported missing 8 months prior. She should look considerably worse, I thought, especially considering her lack of supplies. These woods were harsh, brutal wilderness. Even experienced hikers and hunters had become lost in the area and had died from the elements. I quickly called into the station and told them what I'd seen, then grabbed my backpack and took off on foot, running up the rocky slope towards the trees. If she continued at the pace she'd been moving, I had a good chance of catching up with her. At the top of the hill I managed to find her tracks. I followed them into the woods, tracing a path through the trees. For almost an hour I followed her path through the forest, becoming more and more convinced that I should have caught up with her. I realized something was wrong, and I had lost the trail. It was like the woman had vanished. I kept moving forward, thinking maybe I would pick up her tracks again. This happened sometimes, I knew as an amateur hunter. The quarry's path would disappear occasionally only to reappear a little ways away. So I kept going, pushing aside branches and shrubbery, and moving ever deeper into the overgrown wilderness. And that was when I saw it. "What the hell is that?" I muttered to myself, not believing my own eyes as the object came into focus up ahead. It was a staircase that appeared out of the overgrowth, looking otherworldly in this environment. What is this doing out here? I realized I was talking to myself but couldn't help it. I also couldn't seem to help the fact that I was steadily moving towards the staircase in the forest, despite a growing feeling which told me I should stay away. The closer I got to the stairs, the more I felt as if someone was watching me. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck and goosebumps rose on my arms as I approached, moving closer and closer until I was standing right in front of it. Strangely enough, the stairs looked relatively new. They appeared unassuming and normal in every way, except for their odd location. The wood was not weather-worn or moss-coated. It was clean and I would guess it had been built in the last 10 or 20 years. But the staircase ended after exactly 13 steps. It was a staircase leading to nowhere. It was an eerie sight out here, since I was well aware of how difficult it would be to construct them in the middle of nowhere. What was the purpose of them? Who would build them and why? Even as I was asking myself these questions, I found myself walking up the stairs. It was like I was in a dream, as my feet seemed to move involuntarily upwards. But the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck grew worse and worse with each step. And I could feel the weight of someone else's movements on the stairs with me, I was sure of it. Eventually the paranoia became so overpowering that I had to turn around, feeling as if someone or something was definitely right behind me on the stairs. But when I turned around there was no one there. Suddenly I felt terrified as hell, and started wondering what I'd been thinking climbing those stairs in the woods that shouldn't have been there. I started going back down, still feeling eyes watching me from all around. The trees nearby rustled with movement and I saw a vague shape moving behind them. Hurrying the remainder of the way down the steps, I called out to the figure, thinking it was the woman I had seen earlier. "Miss, if that you? I've been looking all over for you. Are you all right?" I asked the dark figure in the shadows, but it didn't move or respond. Instead it just continued to watch me. "Okay, lady, I can't help you if you don't." Suddenly it occurred to me that the figure in the shadows was too tall to be the woman I'd seen earlier. It looked to be a person at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. And they were ducking behind a tree so as not to be seen clearly. The thing stood up even taller and I realized it had been crouched down. It was enormous, its form impossible to examine in the low light. But it was definitely watching me. And there were more of them, I realized, my heart pounding faster and harder until it felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. I spun around, looking at the forest all around me, seeing shadow shapes everywhere. For a few long moments I was frozen, unable to move or breathe or think. And then I saw a long-fingered hand pushing back the foliage, preparing to emerge. That woke me up from my trance. Whatever these things were, I could tell they were not benevolent or good. They were creatures of darkness, luring people to them so they could feast on their minds. I tore my gaze away from it and began to run. Racing through the trees, I could sense them following after me. A platoon of lanky, impossibly tall creatures with long fingers. Were they the ones who had created the staircase out here? Were they aliens? Sasquatches? I had no idea, but every time I looked back over my shoulder I saw them gaining on me, vague shapes moving so quickly they blurred and were tough to make out. That was when I realized it was getting dark outside. But that didn't make sense, since when I'd set out it had been the early morning hours, around 8 a.m. Checking my watch, I saw it was no longer functioning, nor were my cell phone or GPS devices working. With no other choice but to keep running, that's what I did. Bolting through the forest until eventually I found the rocky slope beside the dirt road where I'd left my truck. I ran right over the edge of the cliff, so terrified and frantic that I didn't see it coming. The things were just behind me by that point, and I was almost ready to resign myself to dying trying to fight them. Instead, I went tumbling down the rock-strewn hillside, somersaulting and hitting my elbows, knees, shoulders, and skull off the boulders and stones. A mini avalanche ensued and I went down hard, face-planting as my feet were unable to keep up with my momentum. A sharp pain struck me in the forehead and I tasted blood in my mouth as my vision went dark. I laid in a pile of rubble and went to sleep. When I woke up, there was a park ranger standing over me, asking if I was okay. The weird thing was, I didn't recognize him. "You look familiar," he said, furrowing his brow. "What's your name?" I told him and his jaw dropped, his face turning a shade paler. "It can't be. Everybody thought you were dead." Looking around, I saw my truck was nowhere to be seen. It was a different season as well, the trees were turning slightly yellow when I went into the forest, an early signal of autumn. But now they were bright green as they would be at the beginning of summer. "What's the date today?" I asked him. He told me, but I didn't believe him at first. "You're making that up," I said, shaking my head. I just went into the woods for a couple hours to find the woman. That's when I remembered her again. Did anyone find her? Or is she still missing? Nobody's seen any woman. Just like nobody has seen you for 8 months. His eyes were suspicious and I realized he thought I was losing my mind. Or had lost it out in the forest. I shook my head and looked back into the woods. We gotta get a search party out there. Didn't you hear me? If you saw a woman when you went out there, she's long gone by now. My eyes stayed fixed firmly on the trees in the distance. Not for her. There's something else out there. I couldn't resist the pull of it and started wandering back up the rocky slope. It felt like I was an iron filing and that staircase was a strong magnet, drawing me towards it. We all need to go to it. The other ranger grabbed my arm and pulled me back, restraining me, yelling at me to calm down. It took 5 more men to get me to stop, and to get me into the hospital. They keep telling me what I saw wasn't real. That I was suffering from exposure. That I got lost in the forest and hit my head, suffering a concussion. The doctors say I hallucinated all of it. But I know what I saw. And as soon as I get out of this hospital. 10th story. This story was shared by you/insomniac_writer. I found stairs in the middle of nowhere, I shouldn't have climbed them. Hello everyone, my name is Luke and I'm posting this to hopefully get some help, or at least some knowledge about what's happening or how I should deal with this nightmare. It all began a few days ago, when I was taking a stroll through the woods behind my house. No, I don't live in the middle of nowhere like a Neanderthal, but in a small, quiet neighborhood just outside the big city. The woods are also pretty safe, as the area I live in has more insects than mammals. I don't usually take these strolls as forests creep me out ever since I was little, but sometimes I need to clear my head. This was one of those days. After having the most boring and tiring night shift, I slept until early noon and I only woke up because my phone made a ping noise, letting me know I had a notification. Having an unfair fight with my eyelids, I barely managed to open them enough to read the text. It was from my girlfriend. The text, more like a whole paragraph, basically said she needed some time to herself and that we should take a break. Of course she added the classic, "It's not you, it's me." I knew what this meant, most likely a breakup. I texted her back, supporting her even though my heart ached as a heavy flow of memories of us hit me like a truck. I got out of bed, my mood killing the need for sleep, and ate some leftovers from yesterday. I was trying to keep myself occupied so as to not think about the only person in the world that kept me sane, now breaking up with me. I remembered the woods behind my house, and the trail that led in the forest. Against my better judgment, I decided to take a stroll through the woods, to clear my head and let nature calm me down. I put on a pair of black jeans, a white t-shirt, a black zip-up hoodie and my beat-up Air Force Ones before leaving the house and heading towards the trail. I started down the trail. I was pretty familiar with the forest, as I've taken a few more walks beforehand, so I wasn't worried about getting lost. The weather was clear, as the bright, yellow bulb shined its blinding light through the sea-like sky. It was unusually hot for autumn. Leaves were starting to fall, seeing them in their different decaying stages, some green, freshly fallen, other yellow or brown, forming the colorful crunchy carpet that I was walking on. Adding to this, the fresh air and slight breeze hitting my skin was refreshing. The birds were chirping while sitting on different branches. I even saw a squirrel climb into their winter shelter. I checked my watch, 2 p.m. I was getting pretty close to the point of the trail I usually stopped at before turning around to go back to my house, but this time, I decided to go in further, I'll walk until 3 p.m. then I'll turn back, is what I said to myself, not knowing that this single decision would change my life forever. I walked around 15 more minutes before I noticed something strange: the silence. What I mean by that isn't the peacefulness of the forest with its occasional sounds, no, I mean complete and utter silence. There were no birds, no leaves hushing around in the gust of the gentle wind, nothing. I stopped dead in my steps, a cold chill running down my spine. A sudden, uncontrollable panic settled in as I looked around rapidly. My eyes were rapidly dancing on my surroundings before they landed on something that didn't make the situation any better. In the middle of the trees, around 15 feet or so from the trail, were stairs. Yes, what looked like a flight of stairs taken out of an office building were sitting, ridiculously, in front of me, in the middle of the forest. About 10 concrete stairs along with a steel guardrail, looking brand new as if they've just been copy-pasted there, went up to nothing. At the top of the stairs was nothing. I checked my watch to look at the time, but, instead of the blue, digital numbers, there were lines and dots, as if the watch broke out of nowhere. Damn it, I said, my panicky state getting worse. I had to calm down, I had to think rationally, so I did the only thing reasonable at that time. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, hoping that when I'd open them again everything would be back to normal. I was now the moron of every horror movie. I should have turned 180 degrees and bolted down the way I came. After some seconds went by, I opened my eyes again, calmer and full of hope. But as soon as my vision came back, the flight of stairs did as well. Well, that's not making this better, I mumbled to myself. My mind instinctively rushed to try and make sense of why they were there. An old house maybe? But it couldn't be. The stairs looked brand new and the ground around them looked normal, undisturbed. Trying to make sense of the situation didn't help at all, and the sun was beginning to go the other way, signaling it was going to be afternoon in an hour or so. Before I spun around to leave, something about them made me want to get closer, to analyze. I don't know how to describe the feeling, something within me just wanted to get closer. I couldn't resist. As soon as I was next to them everything felt weird, the air felt heavier, the silence got morbidly worse, I couldn't even hear my own pulse. My panicky state suddenly went away, an unusual calmness overcoming it. I analyzed them like a crazy architect, looking behind them, at their corners. Every bit of surface they had was looked over. If anyone were to be on the trail at that moment they would have thought I was insane. Then, out of nowhere, I made the worst decision of my life. I climbed them. As soon as I got to the top, everything went dark, like the sun exploded and the world transformed into an eternal void. I woke up hours later, because when I opened my eyes the sun was almost set, the moon slowly appearing over the horizon. I was sweaty, sitting on the cold forest floor, the stairs nowhere to be found. I looked around, confused. Did I dream it all? The voice in my head asked me. It couldn't have been a dream, it seemed too real, and why would I even decide to take a nap just off the trail? Nothing made sense, nothing would make sense anymore. I got up, dusted myself off and slowly began to walk back to my house. I got back to town. It was colder now, it was noon. The lights on the street lamps were shining a bright, mustard yellow light, illuminating the sidewalk and a little bit of the street as well. The night sky was just as clear as it was during the day. It was littered with tiny, sparkly stars though, making it look like a beautifully painted canvas. I got back to my house and strangely, the lights were on. I muttered to myself, a little confused. I was just about to put the keys in the lock, before I saw the handle being pressed. I snapped back and hid behind one of my garden bushes, so I wouldn't be seen. What came out of the house was impossible, it was me. I was walking out of my house, but I was already outside. My head started to hurt, my mind was spinning, it didn't make sense. How could there be another me? It couldn't have been possible, but there I was, walking out with a smile on my face, heading for my car after I locked the door. I got a glimpse of my face, it looked the same as mine, but there was something off. I couldn't pinpoint what, but something was definitely off about it. My second self got in my car and left. As soon as my second self left, I went into my house, with no hesitation. It was still the same as I had left it, but the atmosphere felt wrong. I looked around, checking if any furniture was moved, if anything was missing, but everything was in its place. I even checked if the fire hook next to the fireplace was missing, it wasn't. Then I looked at the photos of myself and everything started to spin again. I picked up one of the small wood frames to take a closer look. It was me, smiling next to my dog who died 7 years ago. The dog was fine, but my smile, it seemed fake, it looked fake. To anyone else, the difference would be impossible to spot, but to me, it was clear as day. I don't know for how long I looked at the photo before I heard the keys clicking in the door. The thing was back. I put the framed photograph back and went in to hide. As soon as it walked in the house, the air got heavy again, like it did when I went next to the stairs. The footsteps stopped suddenly, the tension was crushing me. I closed my eyes, repeating in my mind that this couldn't be real. Then, I heard it speak. "Come out, Luke. I know you're here." I opened my eyes, frozen in place, my heart pounding out of my chest. How did it know I'm here? Did it see me? No, it didn't. I was hidden from the windows and the door. Then it clicked. I left the door unlocked after my double locked it. "Fuck, I'm stupid," I said to myself. It spoke again. "Are you going to make this easy, or are you going to make me come get you?" It said with a cold chuckle. I couldn't run, it would spot me, and God knew what I was dealing with, so I did the only thing I could have in that situation. I slowly forced my body up to face it. "There you are," it said with a creepy smile, spread across its face. I couldn't say anything, how could I? Myself was talking to me, eyes to eyes, my own world was crumbling upon me. "I know this is weird to you, but you did it yourself, Luke, all because you're a curious moron," it said, its smile now fading away. "How?" I finally managed to mutter. Out of all the things I could have said, I settled on, "How, great." "Are you serious? Don't you remember climbing those stairs?" The thing spoke, keeping an eye on me. So I wasn't dreaming, I thought, feeling the blood flow through me. I couldn't move, I barely managed to stay on my feet, I felt dizzy. "Now, your past, present and future is mine," the double me said, starting to laugh, "and I'll make sure you won't mess anything up." It continued, and before I knew it I was getting tackled. The thing was on top of me, pinning me to the ground. Its hands now transformed from normal human hands to sharp, hairy claws. Its eyes went from looking like my emerald green color to a crazed red, like the creature hadn't slept in days. Its nose now looked more like it belonged to a dog or deer. The body began to twitch unnaturally, all the while worms were crawling in its dark hair. Some even got on my face, making me yelp instinctively. I also found out why the air was so heavy around it. The stench oozing from its body almost made me throw up. It smelled like rotten corpses, like death. Before I knew it, what I can only guess were my primal instincts kicked in. fueled by adrenaline and panic. I grabbed the creature by the neck. It laughed. "Do you think you can choke me out, Luke? You're dead." It grinned, its teeth now yellow with two sharp fangs at the edges of its mouth. My hands came down, trying to punch the thing away, but I couldn't reach it. It started choking me. I looked around for a smidget of hope, knowing my life was about to end. I saw we were close to the fireplace, and I also saw the fire hook. It looked reachable. The thing was too busy trying to kill me to see I was trying to get my only hope. I was about to give up before my fingers touched it. I was feeling the claws starting to get under my skin, as the thing started to choke me harder. I finally fully gripped the hook, hitting it with all the power I had left straight in the head. The creature shrieked as it stumbled back. In my rush of adrenaline I got up, taking deep breaths as I felt blood dripping from my neck while air flowed through my body again. As fast as the thing stumbled back, it charged again, but this time it didn't manage to get me, as I pointed the sharp end of the hook at it, impaling in its arm. The creature fell to the ground, dropping my car keys from its pocket. I saw them and made a run for it. I took the keys and rushed out of my house. I shakily but quickly unlocked my car. I got in, started the car and backed out of my driveway. Then I floored it down the road. Behind me, I heard something grab the trunk just before I managed to get away. It was the creature. But it didn't manage to fully grab it, so the thing lost its grip. I got away. I kept driving and I didn't stop until I was out of town. I'm now stopped at a hotel, but I'm planning to get on the road again. I don't know what to do. I'm still shaken and terrified for my life, for my existence. I tried calling my friends, my family, but all of them thought I was joking. Even tried 911, but they didn't believe me either. They said that prank calling the emergency line can be a finable offense and to not do it again. Nobody believed me. That's another reason why I came here, to hopefully find someone that understands what is happening and maybe help me. If no one has experienced this, all I can tell you, no matter how tempted you are, never approach stairs you see in the middle of the woods, or anywhere they aren't supposed to be. 11th story. This story was shared by you/Drekanox. I climbed up the stairs in the woods. I can't get back down. I joined as a park ranger 5 months before the events of this story. I would encounter the stairs occasionally, but it was random when they'd appear. Once, I went a month without seeing them. Then I'd run into 3 of them in 3 days consecutively. Hold on, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Most of you probably don't even get what I'm talking about. In the national park where I work, occasionally, in the wilderness, you'll find staircases which seem to sprout out of nowhere. And just staircases, out in the open. They don't seem to lead anywhere, and they go away just as quickly as they come. Now, I'm pretty sure this would be a bigger news story than it is, but, as it is, the higher-ups want to keep a wrap on them. I don't know if perhaps they know more than I do about them, but whatever it is, the other rangers didn't care too much for them either. Whenever I would ask about them, most of them would just straight up ignore me and start talking about the weather. Some of them would glare at me as if I'd committed an unforgivable sin and told me to never mention them again. A few of them would just shrug and get on with whatever it was we were supposed to be doing. I did find someone though, I'll call him Mark, who was a bit more open to talking about them. Listen, you're new here, and most people just get the hint that no one is supposed to talk about them, but, yeah, they just sort of pop up. He paused, and looked at me quizzically. Have you ever come across one which is upside down? I shook my head. I've seen one of them like that, and some of the others have too. I have no clue what it means. Only thing that you need to know is that you are never to ever go on them. Do that and the least you'll be getting is fired. He then trailed off, not detailing the things that could happen which would be worse than that. And for a time, I just sort of accepted that. We weren't supposed to be going on the stairs. Simple enough. I even began to ignore it. It was easy enough to ignore them for the most part. Aside from looking really weird, they weren't doing any harm, right? That was, until one day we got an alert that a kid had disappeared somewhere in the woods. I was sent out as part of the search party, and as I began combing the area where the kid was last seen, I saw it. A set of stairs lined with a yellow carpet. Another one of the rangers, I'll call her Stacy, found me staring at it. Stacy was part of the crowd which would ignore the stairs as much as possible, but her face became pale when she saw them. She looked at me and shook her head. We'll keep searching but, well, we need to get ready to tell the folks the bad news. She left, and I quickly pieced together what she thought had happened. The kid must have gone up the stairs and then, well, whatever happened when you went up them happened. Meaning she had already written off the kid as dead. Me though? I wasn't one to give up that easily, unfortunately, and I was new here and somehow felt that I could pull something amazing off. What an idiot I was. I won't lie though, I did feel odd while going up the stairs. I spent a good minute just staring at them initially, unsure if I should go up or not. In the end I figured that if I didn't make my move soon someone would find me, and I did not want to be caught doing it. I counted the steps on my hands as I went up them, 13 in total. Weird, an odd number, and as I put my foot on the topmost step, my body shook. You ever have that false falling sensation when you're falling asleep? When you're trying to fall asleep, but it's really your body just trying to check if everything's a-okay or something, I believe. That's what I felt, as if when my foot descended to meet the topmost step, the ground beneath me gave way but immediately popped back into existence. And when that was done, I was no longer at the top of the staircase. I was at the bottom again. And I was no longer in the woods. I was in someone's house and the stairs were still completely out of place. They led up right into a wall. I looked around. The carpet here didn't even match that of the stairs, it was a crimson-red color. I was in a hallway, and could hear some voices coming from a room. I know it sounds stupid, but the first thing that came to mind was that I was wearing shoes which had been outside in the woods on a carpet. If it was my mom, she would be screaming blood murder at me. What would the owner or owners of this house think? I crept up towards the door, dreading what was coming up. As it was, I couldn't exactly go back down into the woods. Maybe I could keep going up, but would that lead me back home? Or somewhere else? As it was, even though this was a weird situation, I was still more confident with staying here. Because, at the very least, this place was safe. And as they say, better the devil you know. I went into the room, preparing an apologetic face. The room looked fairly normal at first glance. There were 4 people sitting at a table, 2 adults and 2 children, who looked like they were eating dinner based on how dark it was outside. The television was on and there was some sort of news program on which they must have been watching before they noticed me and turned their heads. And that's what was off about them, their heads. Each of them had their heads on backwards. Even the newscaster on television had his head on backwards and was looking out with his chair turned around. Otherwise, they were just like you and I. And really, thinking about it, it seems almost comical. Though it didn't seem funny at the time. The four of them screamed, and one of them lunged for a knife. I didn't want to stick around any longer and wound back up the stairs. Instinctively, I thought that if I went up them, I would once again end up somewhere else. It was that or go outside the door, but I had a strange feeling that when I went out into the world, given what I saw from the news broadcast, I would find a world filled with people with their heads on backwards. As my feet touched the top of the stairs, I once again felt the weird falling sensation as I found myself back in the woods. I sighed in relief now. Granted, I hadn't found the kid I was looking for, but I was safe from whatever those creatures were. However, there was definitely something off here. I realized that quickly enough when I glanced up. There was nothing off initially until I saw that there was something accompanying the sun overhead. It was another sun, which had descended towards the horizon. Two suns in the sky. I definitely wasn't back in Kansas. Taking a deep breath, I went up the stairs again. And again. And again. I saw many things, worlds which were a lot like our own, but subtly different. People having the wrong number of appendages, people who had only one eye or three. Sometimes I would even end up at some different part of time. I saw dinosaurs roam across a plain before I got my common sense together and left pronto. I have my own theory on what the stairs are now. They're gateways between different universes. I can only think that the fabled, inverted ones that Mark once mentioned somehow lead back, but I haven't been able to find one. I've been going up the same set of stairs, hoping to end back home. Granted, I finally got a break. Well, something of a break. I found him, the kid I was looking for. The little squirt started screaming the moment I approached him, understandable I guess, but I managed to introduce myself and calm him down. We ended up in someone's house, though thankfully the homeowner isn't here. The only thing I could think to do at that point was call for help, but my phone wasn't getting a signal. And so, I went on here and was hoping some of you could help us get back home. I've been scouring the internet and it does seem like we managed to loop back around finally, given I can see that the national park where I work at is listed there on the internet. I saw a bunch of familiar sites and news items as well. It's good to be back home. Overall, we're doing fine for now, though we are kind of getting hungry. And oh yeah, there is one more odd thing here now that I think about it. It's this keyboard. I don't know why, but it just isn't made for someone like me. I think the owner of this house had some sort of accident and lost a finger on both of their hands. And they must have had this keyboard custom built for themselves later, because how is anyone with a full set of 7 fingers supposed to use this thing? Anyway, do please send help soon. 12th story. This story was shared by you/royalmoose_. If you go into the woods, here's my advice. I'm somewhat of an experienced outdoorsman. From a young age I've loved to fish and hike, and more recently have gotten into firearms, hunting, and shooting. Over my 20 years I've picked up some good tips and tricks for those of you who might go camping, hunting, fishing, whatever. I'm from the Midwestern US and that's where I've spent most of my time off the beaten path. I've had some weird experiences far in the woods, far from any named road, with nothing but my Ruger and a flashlight. Most of this shit I had to learn myself, so I wanted to share what I've learned with you all. This will be a numbered list with a short explanation, for most. 0, yes, rule number 0. And that's because it's the most important. Carry a fucking gun. I know many of you probably can't due to age or where you live, but if at all possible carry a firearm, preferably a primary firearm and a backup. Your primary firearm should be able to drop any large game in your area with one shot, .308, .30-06, 7.62x54R, .45-70 government and other larger rifle cartridges will serve this purpose well for you. For a sidearm I recommend something chambered in .45 ACP or 10 mm. Game wardens have begun carrying 10 mm Glocks in many parts of the US because, believe it or not, a 10 mm packs enough punch to take down a bear with well-placed shots / well-placed mag dumps. Become competent with your weapon and know how every part works. 1. Never, ever, under any circumstances should you ever panic. Do whatever you need to do to keep your wits about you, 10 deep breaths, a prayer, literally anything. But should you ever find yourself in a situation where you will need to depend on yourself to survive, I don't mean finding shit to eat if you get lost or anything like that, I mean having to flee from something that wants to hurt you, or have others with you who are depending on you, panicking will get you killed or worse. 2. Hiking, hunting, fishing, camping etc. with someone. Never let them out of your sight. There have been many documented cases of someone turning around to look at something then turning back and their partner is gone. If you want to learn more about this shit, look into Missing 411. Many people go missing after being out of sight for literal seconds and are never found, or sometimes their clothes are found neatly folded on top of a boulder 10 miles away up a mountain 10 years later, or similarly impossible circumstances. 2b, subrule for number 2 because it's related, not to sound like an asshole but if you're gonna bring someone with you, make sure that they trust you and can follow directions to the letter and without hesitation should the need arise. 3. Pay attention to what you hear. Specifically, what you don't hear. What do I mean by that? Well, don't get so drawn into the beauty of nature that you neglect to be mindful of your surroundings, especially sound, especially lack thereof. Should you ever find yourself deep in the woods and notice that the sounds of nature around you have stopped, no more skittering squirrels, no more noisy ass fucking bugs, no more distant howling or barking or anything, there is something in your vicinity that the animals around you do not want to be aware of their presence. If that ever happens, I highly recommend turning around and going back the way you came at a steady, measured pace. Do not run. Do not scream. Do not allow your breathing to become particularly panicked. Basically, keep your shit together and get out of there, because if the animals all around you were smart enough to do so, follow their example. 4. Should you smell roses or copper out of nowhere, say loudly but firmly and calmly, I have a right to be here. Should the smell persist, it would be wise to go back the way you came, again at a quick but measured pace, and don't run or show signs of panic. Aside from persistence of the smell, should pebbles or rocks be thrown at you from an unseen location, go back the way you came, but now it's fine to run and you probably want to make sure you have a round in the chamber while doing so. 5. If you smoke cigarettes, good. Smoke a cigarette or a pipe while you walk. Smoke protects. 6. Stay away from boulder fields. Many people go missing in boulder fields. 7. Psalm 23 verse 4, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. 8. Walking along a river or stream. Take a step away from it every half mile or so. 9. Make your presence known. Hum a tune or sing a song, sing a march or think out loud. Just make your presence known and remember that you have a right to be there. 10. Know the folklore of your local area, or that of wherever you're in the woods. Specifically, the Native American folklore, and you can compound this by further studying reports of European explorers in that area. The natives would have been there for such a long time that they would have incorporated any beings, spirits, whatever you want to call them, into their beliefs and folklore. By studying later accounts of Europeans, you can see what happens when one unfamiliar with or downright disrespectful, or fearful, towards whatever inhabits that area is present. 11. These things all kind of go hand in hand. Carry a steel water bottle. If you're ever outside of your tent at night, do so with a yellow light in hand, and keep dried garlic in your backpack. 12. Possibly the second most important rule here: respect nature. No hippie shit, but don't litter, leave the berries for the birds, respect the trees, and so forth. Leave an area as you found it, and if you have to take anything, do so with utmost gratitude and respect for nature's provision. You may also leave an offering of food or tobacco if so inclined. 12b. Think no evil, speak no evil, do no evil. Come with good intentions and harm is much less likely to befall you. 13. If you ever feel an unexplainable, almost implanted, as if it wasn't your thought or idea, urge to move away from your group, you must ignore and fight that desire with all of your willpower. 14. Before you go telling me I'm a piece of shit for this, just keep reading. This is its own rule, but is also the elaboration I spoke on earlier. If you hear someone calling for help, especially at night, think very fucking carefully about whether you want to go out there to help them. Because it isn't guaranteed that whoever or whatever is calling for help really needs it, and isn't just trying to lure you in. Could be a cracky in the woods trying to rob you, could genuinely be someone in distress, but it could also be something deliberately mimicking a human voice, only a human voice that it's heard before, only words and phrases that it has heard before, to lure you as well. In this situation, I recommend notifying police and or national park/state park/whatever relevant authorities. It is not your responsibility to help someone. I hope this has been informative, and I would love to answer any questions you may have. Apologies for any formatting issues as I am on mobile. Stay safe out there, folks. 13th story. This story was shared by you/Worcester_ST. If you hear a baby crying in the woods, don't follow it, pictures included. Last Friday I was driving on a windy back road in the mountains of rural Utah. I was around 10 miles from the nearest town when my engine died. I pulled out my phone to look at the map. There was no service, but I downloaded a map of the area just in case. I saw that, if I followed the road, it was a 10-mile walk that wound back and forth along some back roads. I didn't like that idea very much. I also saw that the town was actually only 2 miles away as the crow flies. In a direct line from me, I just have to climb a little bit to cut my journey down. I shot a look up the mountain, left a note on my car saying what I was doing, and set off through the brush. That part of Utah didn't have much underbrush, just some scraggly bushes and the occasional tree clinging to life in the dry soil. I was making good time, and soon had shut off my phone's light to rely on the moon, which was a bright pearl in the sky. When my eyes had adjusted, it was almost like walking around in the daytime. The valley extended for dozens of miles to my right, and the weather was only slightly chilly with the wind. That was when I heard a baby's cry, low on the wind. It was far off in the distance to my left, slightly higher up the slope. I paused, listening hard. It came again, unmistakably the pinched short cry of a newborn infant. I paused for a moment before heading in the direction of the call. There was no one around for miles, and now there's this kid. After a few minutes of walking, I stumbled across what had to have been a 100-year-old cemetery. There were no headstones, just rocks marking the spots where the people must have been buried. I couldn't hear any more crying. I put my phone away in my back pocket, listening hard for the kid. I figured it must have been an animal. I thought I'd heard that coyotes could mimic human cries. Then I turned to look at the moon, only now noticing it had been ringed by thick dark clouds. Almost as if on cue, the clouds rushed forward. Over the course of 5 seconds, the cemetery went from lit up by moonlight to pitch blackness. The clouds must have been covering every star in the sky as well as the moon. The darkness was complete. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It was so black that it seemed almost physical, enveloping and dulling each of my senses. Then the baby cried again from my left, loud and piercing. I jerked, caught my foot on a rock, and fell forward against one of the fences. The baby was shrieking loudly. It couldn't have been more than a few feet away, just on the other side of the fence. I pushed back, sticking my hand into my pocket, feeling for my phone to turn on a light. That's when the dry papery fingers slid around the back of my throat. Nails dug into the skin, and I thought I heard a high raspy giggle from behind me just before they began to squeeze. I jerked forward, flipped on my light, and spun around. There was nothing there. I ran away, trying to put as much distance between myself and the cemetery as I could. When I finally reached the town, I put my hand up to my neck and felt the scrapes on my neck. I told myself it was just a tree, but I knew that wasn't true. I managed to get an old mechanic to come help me with my car. On the way back I asked him a question about a cemetery up in the hills. He stiffened, looked at me, and said, "We don't go up there. We know better." 4th story. This story was shared by you/mountain666. Help, I've lived in Appalachia all my life and this weekend I saw something I can't explain. For the past 18 years, not including 3 years in college, I've lived in a remote part of the Appalachians. Cell phone service is virtually non-existent at my house, and using the internet requires a 30-minute trip to the local library. Despite the isolation of the area, I've always considered it a tranquil and safe place to call home. With so few people around, there's nobody to commit crimes in the first place. Home is a vast expanse of rolling greenery which in the fall becomes a wild display of reds, oranges, and yellows, like the embers of a slowly dying campfire. I never could have comprehended the primal terror that this breathtaking landscape could conceal until last night. As a senior pre-med student, I've got a busy schedule. Endless hours of labs and class, followed by nerve-wracking evenings spent trying to be accepted somewhere, string out my nerves to their last fiber. When I saw an opening in my calendar, I felt compelled to return to the primal beauty that nurtured my nascent mind. Thankfully, my lovely girlfriend of 2 years also had an open weekend, so I felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of sharing my home with her. We meandered our way to the mountains late Friday afternoon with our windows down, bathing ourselves in the crisp fall air. After about an hour of driving, the mountain I call home came into view. As one of the largest in our area, its gently sloping base culminated in a rocky backbone which snaked its way into the distance. I shifted my car into 4-wheel drive and we began the long crawl up the rocky trail that can be loosely termed my driveway. We meandered gradually through the depths of the forest until my house came into view. More specifically, my guest house. Located about a quarter-mile from my main home, the guest house is the home we keep spotlessly clean for company, a stark comparison to our more cluttery main home. A gentle rain fell which accented the sweet earthy smell of the forest as we brought our bags inside. My parents greeted us and we enjoyed a brief home-cooked dinner with plenty of small talk and laughs. Around midnight my parents let us be and we made ourselves cozy. A city girl her whole life, my girlfriend is fascinated by the outdoors and animals, more specifically she loves listening to the mournful howls of coyotes. Naturally being a mountain man, I long ago mastered the art of screeching out realistic howls and barks. On most nights I can easily lure some lonely pack of coyotes to respond back. We huddled around my bedroom window and I let out a few howls. My girlfriend winced at the loudness and ridiculousness of my efforts and we waited for a response. Nothing. I tried again and nothing but the echo of my own voice responded. Maybe it's too cold, I thought. On a cold rainy night the coyotes are probably huddled inside their caves and crevices trying to sleep away the rough weather. Suddenly, something answered my howls. Coyotes can make some strange sounds, but this was different. A shriek echoed up the hollows, almost human sounding, but too high-pitched and piercing in tone to be produced by a human larynx. What the fuck, I gasped. My girlfriend hopped up in fright. What was that? She asked in a nervous voice. Bobcat maybe, I replied. I howled once more and waited. Again the shriek split the cold foggy air of the forest, though this time much closer. I reached for my flashlight and shone a beam of pale LED light through the depths of the mist-filled air. I swung the beam around searching and just at the edge of the beam I saw something unimaginable. As a keen student of biology, I have a broad knowledge of vertebrates and invertebrates and this was something different. It stood on two legs covered in patchy hair that culminated in cloven feet like a deer's. Its upper body was almost humanoid again, covered in patchy hair. The skin of its abdomen clung tightly to its exposed ribs and undulating vertebrae. On top of this anorexic-looking frame sat a head that looked at once human and at once animal with branches of sharp antlers coming out from the back of its head. The beast loped with a supernatural litheness upon its bony legs and it seemed to be making its way to the porch. Go the fuck upstairs, Anna, I said with a faltering voice. Anna sprinted out of the room and up the stairs while I grabbed my trusty shotgun. I made my way to the living room which attached to the porch, and shined my light through the window on the door. My beam was met with eyes that would scare the soul from your body. The eyes were empty and pale like those of an aged hound with cataracts, but they were alive with a sort of ancient energy, and they gazed straight through my terrified adrenaline-soaked brain. The walls of the house reverberated with a deafening explosion as I began unloading my shotgun on the door and my flashlight fell to the floor. It seemed almost sacrilegious to be shooting at those eyes, but they stared at me with such a demonic and otherworldly aspect that I could not begin to understand their motives. Screams punctuated the roar of my 12-gauge thunder, screams from both the beast and my traumatized partner hiding upstairs. The eyes vanished in a hail of 00 lead that I unleashed. Silence came as abruptly as the roar of the shotgun had moments before, and I frantically called my parents from the home phone. Some night you had, my dad chuckled in the morning. Yeah, never seen a bear that close to the house, I squeaked out. Kinda pissed about the door, but a bear like that can't be left alone. Sorry, poor Anna is too scared to stay the rest of the weekend, my dad said, still jovial. We're back at school and I have no idea what to do. My parents would think I was crazy if I told them the truth behind this weekend, but I can't leave them there with that thing. Something that paranormal doesn't seem as though it would die at the volley of a shotgun. Maybe posting this on Reddit will help me clear my mind and figure out how to deal with this. 5th story. This story was shared by you/Rogue Enjoyer. The disappearance of Hans Drucker. Below is the transcript found on the phone of Hans Drucker, a 21-year-old citizen of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, last seen at Karanadavur, a small town in the Kozhikode district of Kerala state in the Republic of India. Drucker had a popular video blog known as Werelddrucker, and the below videos seem to be recorded for the purpose of uploading it there. The phone was found by a local fisherman named Atif Panaparambil and duly handed in to Inspector Ramachandran at Karanadavur police station. Atif claimed to have found it on the beach at some distance from the historic ruins of Padmanabhavilasam Palace, known by the locals as Paranginashicha Kotaram, meaning the palace ruined by the foreigner, while returning from his early morning fishing trip. Upon accessing the phone and investigating, the following videos were found. Police investigation resulted in the declaration of Hans Drucker as a missing person, and the notification of the Dutch embassy. Clip 1, recorded on August 14, 2019. Hans Drucker, a young man with long blonde hair, turns on the front-facing camera and makes a few adjustments to his hair. He smiles widely, then begins speaking cheerily. Hans, good morning dear friends. Thanks for tuning into Werelddrucker today. Please like my video and subscribe if you want to see more of me. If you like this video, check out my previous ones too. Share it with your friends while you're at it, yeah. Hans leans back and chuckles, then moves toward the camera confidentially. Hans, I've been in India for 2 weeks, and now have come to this little town in Kokoli. Never mind, you see the name on the screen. Now you may wonder, Hans, what are you doing in this little backwater? Well, fret not, I'm going to tell you. Today we're going to do something that is my passion, exploring abandoned places. If you follow my previous adventures, you'll see how I have gone to numerous old buildings in the cities I visit. But this time is extra special. Now a bit of history for you guys. The Dutch East India Company was active up and down this coast in the 1600s, and the local chiefs used to make deals with them. You know, I give you trading rights for my place, and you destroy my enemy with your big guns. Now this town was one of those little chiefdoms. And over here also the same deal went on. But the thing is that, the Dutch guy who made the deal here was my ancestor. That's right, Eustachius van Drucker was the commanding officer of the Mooi Den, the Dutch vessel who landed here. The main reason I came to India actually was to visit this place. Little surprise for all my viewers, eh? So near the beach is a palace, with another unpronounceable local name, Laughs, so I'll just call it the palace for you guys. The story is my great-great-great something grandfather. He stayed there for 2 years and learned some of the local language. But over that time, he fell in love with the chief's court dancer or something. And then the king made him leave, then locked up the dancer. But they say the dancer went mad and cursed the place, and it soon faced a lot of misfortunes that made the place uninhabitable. Locals don't even go near it, it's crazy. Hans swigged some water from a metal bottle on his bedside. Hans, I don't really believe in that curse bullshit, you know. Maybe my ancestor just had his troops burn down the place or something. Chuckles, anyway, see you there. Hans holds his palm to the phone to cover the camera, making the screen blank. End of clip 1. Clip 2, recorded on August 15, 2019. Hans is walking down a beach, sweat streaming down, holding the phone to show his face. Hans, hey guys, now I'm on the beach, walking down to the palace. You know, not one of the taxi or auto rickshaw drivers wanted to take me there. No matter how much money I gave, they just said no. So I've got to walk. Hans pans the camera around him. It's a very bright and sunny day. The sea is on one side, and groves of coconut trees on another. Ahead of him is a boat on the shore, where two fishermen are relaxing. Hans, it's hot as hell out here. I already finished my water a while back, brandishing his bottle, so there's no relief. How do the locals manage? Actually, there seems to be two guys ahead. I'll ask them for some water. Hans approaches the boat where the two men were sitting. Both of them were dark-skinned with curly hair, and wore only a lungi, leaving their chests bare. They were subsequently identified by Kerala police as C. Varanen and V. Bashir, both local fishermen. Hans, in English, "Hey guys." Varanen and Bashir turn toward him, wave and smile. Hans reaches the boat and holds the phone at waist level, so we can see his head from below. Hans, in English, "Hey, do you know English?" Bashir, little. What you want? Hans, oh that's great. You have water. Varanen, water, ah. Come. End of clip 2. Clip 3, recorded on August 15, 2019. Hans is sitting on a bench in a small shelter with Varanen and Bashir beside him. He is holding a tender coconut with a straw out of it, which he sips from intermittently. He continues to speak in English. Hans, hello everyone, meet my new friends, Varanen and Bashir. Meeting them really was a godsend. Hans swings the camera so they are clearly in view. Varanen and Bashir are grinning and wave at the camera. Hans swings the camera back to himself. Hans, they not only filled my water bottle, but also got this tender coconut right off a tree for me. Never had anything so cool and sweet before. So, you guys see the hospitality of India? Even for a stranger like me, they dropped everything to help. Varanen and Bashir grinning and nodding. Varanen, ah, you said you're going where? Hans, the palace. What was it called? Padam. Varanen, with wide eyes, Padmana Pavilasam, ah. Hans, cheerfully, yeah. That's the one. Varanen and Bashir share wide-eyed looks. Bashir, leaning forward, don't go there. Especially because you're foreign. What we are saying, listen. Can save your life. Hans, that's what all the auto drivers were saying. Not to go. But I really want to go. My ancestor lived there for some years. Varanen, to Bashir, softly in Malayalam, he is that foreigner's descendant. Bashir, to Hans, then you surely can't go. Please listen. We know that place. If you are the captain's relative, you stay. We'll guide you wherever you want around this place. Don't go. Hans, listen, I've made up my mind to go there. Your old wives' tales won't stop me. Varanen, frantically, not safe. Don't go. Can't say what will happen there. If the woman catches you. Hans, slightly annoyed, now listen, you don't try to stop me. I appreciate you guys helping me, but you can't tell me what to do. Varanen goes to say something but stops. Bashir is already sitting with his head in his hands. Varanen, resigned tone, then go. But don't say we didn't tell you. Hans walks out of the shelter. End of clip 3. Clip 4, recorded on August 15, 2019. Hans is walking down the beach again. Clearly this was taken only about a minute after the previous clip, as the fisherman's shelter can be seen in the background. Hans is speaking in Dutch again. Hans, that was odd, right guys? Locals are really kind, but also too superstitious. Must be afraid of their own shadows. And what was all that talk about a woman catching me? I know I have devilishly handsome looks, he grins at the camera, but not that much. Anyway guys, we're approaching the palace at last, there you see it in the distance. Hans turns the camera around and zooms. In the distance is seen a tiled roof peeking over half-broken, mossy walls. The entire structure has been consumed by the surrounding vegetation. Hans, it's really a relief to see the end goal in sight. Maybe I should get a couple of bricks from there to give those guys, how about that? Laughs. End of clip 4. Clip 5, recorded on August 15, 2019. The camera faces Hans, the sea behind him. Hans, phew, that was way longer than I thought. It took me half an hour to walk from there, even though the building looked close. Drinks water and exhales. Anyway, we're at the palace gate. Take a look guys. Hans turns the camera. We see the gateway to the palace. The gateway is a small building that was once white, but now was black and green from the corroding forces of nature. The roof would have had tiles, but now merely a few beams clung on, like a reminder of past glory. There were wooden double doors, one of which had fallen and the other which was holding on by a single hinge. Both are significantly decayed. Hans, well, time to go in, I guess. Hans walks through the doorway, glancing around. As he steps through, the sound of the wind suddenly falls silent. The main building is some distance away. In traditional architecture of the region, buildings of the wealthy were surrounded by a huge compound. In the corner of the compound is a small building that would have once been a temple to a local deity. Stone paths crisscross the compound, which would have connected the palace with structures that no longer exist. Hans, quietly, this place is crazy, although it's not too big. Hardly a Versailles, yeah. Hans weakly chuckles, but the sound is stifled by the oppressive silence in the courtyard. Hans approaches the temple in the corner. Leaves crunch underfoot, and more than once he starts and looks over his shoulder. Hans, bit creepy out here, I get why the locals don't want to come around. But hey, I've been in worse places. Like that abandoned high-rise out in Medan last year, where that junkie jumped out at me. I had to buy new pants that day. Hans laughs, but he slowly stops and clears his throat. Anyway. Hans turns the camera to show the small shrine. Unlike the rest of the place, the temple seems to be in good condition, with only minimal damage. The walls are still mostly white, and the roof retains most of the tiles. The wooden door is inset with gold decorations, and is bolted with a large, ornate gold latch. Hans' hand reaches out and opens the latch. Hans turns the camera back to himself. Hans, here we go. Hans pushes the door open. His expression goes blank, then his eyes widen and he begins to hyperventilate. Wordlessly, his shaking finger approaches the screen. After missing the button a few times, the camera turns around. The shrine doors are open. The platform where the idol would usually be, was replaced by a much decayed traditional Dutch hat, which had a metal pin with the VOC logo, so rusted that it looked like it would crumble. Bones were scattered all throughout the shrine, and a skull displaying signs of blunt force trauma was placed beneath the platform where the hat lay. The walls of the shrine had writings in an older form of Malayalam, made in a crusty brown substance which appears to be blood. The writings were translated as, why did you abandon your beloved? Where have you gone, crossing the sea? All those who stood in our way are now dead. Soon you must come back to me. The camera remains in place for almost a minute. After that, Hans suddenly whips around. The phone screen is black, presumably due to him putting it in his pocket. After about a minute, Hans is back on screen. The hat seen in the shrine is now on his head. Through the stillness, a faint sound of a female singing, in a tune and language typical of 17th century Kerala, is heard to the accompaniment of anklets. Wordlessly, he starts shuffling toward the palace, his eyes blank. There is a pause in the song, as the anklets continue to ring. Hans begins to mumble, seemingly in the tune of the song. He stops after a short time, and the female voice picks up the song again. As Hans draws closer to the palace, the song and anklets increase in frenzy and intensity. He slowly climbs up the steps of the veranda, and the song can clearly be heard. Set to the tune of a classical dance song, it details the longing of a beloved for her lost lover. Interspersed with it are lines detailing the tortures the bereaved woman inflicted on those who kept her away from her lover, which were not part of the original composition. Hans waits at the door, occasionally singing in accented Malayalam when the female voice is silent, as if prompted. Hans is not known to have any prior knowledge of the language. The song comes to an end after about 10 minutes. The anklets are heard coming closer, rushing to the door, and stopping just on the other side. There is complete stillness for around half a minute. Suddenly, Hans tosses the phone aside, and the camera lands facing upward, recording the mossy, tiled roof which has gaps on it. The door is heard opening and the sounds of Hans' flip-flops along with the anklets are heard receding. The camera records the roof for an hour, during which nothing further is heard or seen, and after which the battery dies. End of clip 5. There was no more media on the phone, so it is unknown how it reached the beach, nearly 250 meters away from the palace. The phone was dead when retrieved by Adhif, and had to be started by an IT team from Kozhikode city, upon which the above clips were accessed. Preceding these clips were regular clips shot in Kochi city, where he was staying prior to his arrival at Karanadavur. Upon viewing the clips, the Kerala police declared the case closed, and attributed his disappearance to a riptide when he went to swim in the sea. The area of a radius of 150 meters around the Padmanabhavilasam Palace was declared an ecologically protected zone, prohibiting people from entering without a permit. However, fishermen say that if they pass the palace on their boats at night, while breeze blows from the land to the sea, they hear the tinkling of anklets interspersed with frenzied laughter, both male and female. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.